You and I met a couple of weeks ago, and just even through our conversation, I'm like, this whole thing needs to be on Blushing Phoenix because you are the epitome of a Blushing Phoenix, which is somebody who has dealt with erythrophobia, fear of blushing, chronic blushing, not 100% cured, or I don't even know if cured is a word for blushing because it's just a natural response of our bodies.
Yeah.
But erythrophobia, being able to move through that fear of blushing and live your life beyond blushing. So I want to spend some time with you today to talk about a little bit about your story and have you just take the floor and share from your perspective. Because during our call specifically, I was so encouraged by just getting the opportunity to talk with you and hear about some of the things, the transformative actions that you would put into place to move through redness and live your life. And just to note, that doesn't always mean like living our best life and being at our highest version. Doesn't mean we don't dip and we don't question things and we don't have moments of insecurity, because I think that sometimes it's marketed in a way of I should never feel any of that ever again. And it's like, well, that's not true. I have my highs and lows too, but it's about continuing to show up, taking some time for self-care, but then also getting back out there. So, without further ado, Alondra, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself? This is your time to talk. There's no right way to do it, but just introduce yourself and then kind of giving us a little bit of your backdrop on how the whole blushing experience started for you and when you started to notice that it was a problem in your eyes.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you've already said my name is Alondra Sanchez. I always introduce myself like that in English, and then I tell people if they know how to speak Spanish, they can say it like Alondra Sanchez. Otherwise, please just say it Alondra Sanchez. Um, but yeah, so I guess I could tell you a little bit about myself and how blushing started. I'm a therapist by trade. So I work with a lot of folks in the mental health field. I feel like when you're kind of an empathetic person or just have experienced trauma or the eldest child, it's very likely that you'll end up in a helping role. And that was what it was like for me. Um, but blushing kind of started for me at a very young age. I would say even my earliest memory was probably like 8 years old, but I feel like it happened even earlier than that. I just have one specific memory when I was 8 years old, and I shared it with you when we did our coaching session. But it kind of just basically started anytime that the attention was on me, or I was like spotlighted. So if I had to volunteer in class, or if anybody was calling me out or questioning me, I would blush or flush very, very quickly and easily, which made it worse because internally for me, I was like, oh my gosh, now they don't even believe me. So I always just felt very misunderstood.
So let's kind of fast forward a little bit because I'm going to probably jump around a little bit here. With me asking you, like this is a moment where I know you've been asked to do speaking at certain events, and you have had spotlight moments now in your adult years, and even being asked like, "Hey, can you do an interview on Blushing Phoenix?" How does that impact you now?
Lately I would say in this past year, even before I started taking action and managing the blush, not managing, but managing how I think about the blushing. Um, this past year, there's been even more growth. I think I started thinking more about the managing, how I feel about the blushing a couple years ago. And in this last year, I've just seen tremendous amounts of growth within myself and how I feel about myself. And so I was thinking about this actually, how I'm not feeling, I am the keynote speaker at this camp for Latina girls next Friday. And I was thinking this morning, like, wow, I'm not even nervous, and that kind of scares me because usually I'd be freaking out. Even when they ask me, I kind of freak out a little bit. But lately it just seems kind of like it'll be fine. I know that I will prepare enough. I know that whatever way it goes, I'm not going to die. I think before my body really perceived it as this threat, like life or death. And now I feel a little bit more at ease about it all.
When you got to that place of feeling so insecure and so restricted by blushing, What was the like talk a little bit about what was your like kind of lowest moment and your pivotal moment of like, I'm not going to be down in this pit. Let me make a transition. What was that like for you, your lowest moment to rising up out of that?
I would say my lowest moment was probably when I was a year or two out of my undergraduate college. Um, I think I had maybe socialized a little less. My life just kind of changed drastically. I spent 4 or 5-ish years hanging out with all my friends, all living together. It was a lot of fun. And then a lot of my friends moved away, and I stayed where we grew up. And life just kind of changed quite a bit. I had a new partner. I was starting a job at a school district, and I remember before starting the job, I knew that they always do a huge orientation and they make all the new people stand up. And I was so nervous and anxious and just really dreading it that I was so desperate that I found a hypnotist and did a few sessions there. It did not help me at all. I did not think that the person was well suited to be in the profession. Now looking back at it, just felt like it was kind of a waste of money. And I was just so desperate to make the blushing go away. And anytime I would blush, which happened all the time, because I was constantly being asked questions. I was the interpreter at this school, so I had to be talking a lot and it just have spotlight on me. And I just dreaded it all the time. Anytime I blush, it was just negative, negative, negative talk the whole time. Like, what are people thinking of me? They must think this, they must think that. A lot of like mind reading. When in reality, I had no idea what people were thinking. And to be honest, they did probably think it was weird. Some of my students would call me out because they're young kids. They don't really know. They'd be like, "Why is your face so red?" And I'd kind of try to brush it off. And for the most part, I think I really had like a flight response where I'd try to like leave the situation all the time. I would figure out a way to just avoid. If I saw somebody at the store that I knew, I tried to avoid it or leave the store as soon as possible. It was just kind of like running my whole life and was really making me feel like this small about myself. And I mean, I think for myself, I'm proud of myself for still doing all the things. I didn't necessarily let it stop me, but I wasn't happy doing those
Mhm.
things. Um, so then I went into grad school and it would still happen all the time. It still does happen quite often. But I think as I grew as a graduate student, then as a therapist, and then just like as a person, I realized that I have this thing about myself that I accept people for who they are all the time. Like I'm friends with everyone. I have friends that are like 80 years old. Like just people are like, how do you have friends like that? And because I just take people for who they are. Of course, if my values don't necessarily align with them, I'm not friends with them, but I'm always going to be kind to people. And so I kind of realized that I could have that kindness and self-compassion for myself as well. And that's where things really shifted for me. Where that negative thinking, I met it with self-compassion. Like, it's okay that you're struggling. It's okay that that was embarrassing for you. We're going to get through it. And then in the past year, I started doing a lot more like nervous system regulating stuff, which I'm surprised it took me that long because as a therapist, you kind of learn about all those things, but I just really didn't know where to start. And with my therapist, she did some CBT and she kind of introduced that idea of like, this is just kind of how my body responds. And I really wasn't ready to take that in at that time. I was like, well, that's a load of BS. I don't like that sucks. Why does my body have to react like that?
Right. It's like, I don't like that answer. That was my response too to my functional neurologist and a couple other people. They're like, it's no, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. And I'm like, okay, other
Yeah.
solutions, please.
Yep. Yep.
Not ready to
And
accept this.
exactly. And then for a while when I was kind of in like this fix mode, I found your page and I saw that you were on you talk about taking propanolol and I had patients on it not for that reason. And I even reached out to my doctor and tried to get on it, but I have lower blood pressure. So he just instantly said no. I was like, okay, that sucks. So there was really like no nothing to kind of like tame it down. I just kind of had to put in, I don't know, just kind of had to figure it out myself. I
Mm.
had support in all of that, but I think it's been really a journey of self-exploration.
You were looking, you were seeking, you were looking for, I heard you talk about the going through some hypnosis and being like,
Mhm.
man, not really, didn't work out with that particular person, but you were trying. I think that the thing from a Blushing Phoenix perspective, just from the community, is when so many people reach out to me and say, I've tried this, and this, and this. And even within my coaching, the thing I ask is like, what have you tried? And for some people, it's like nothing. But then for the ones that are like, I've tried the things and they can just like make all the list, I almost feel like it's through the trying and the exploration and the experimenting that you do start to realize like maybe this is part of me. And the interesting thing too is that um through the acceptance, but not hyperfixation, is when I actually started seeing it go away for me. Like it still happens. And there, like a few weeks ago, it was happening like crazy. I was like, what is wrong with me? But and it felt like a setback almost, like, oh no, because for so many years I utilized the blushing as the sign of whether or not I was making progress or not. Like that's my success. Like, did I blush or did I not? And
Mhm.
then I love what you said about you started not managing the blushing, but you started managing how you were thinking about yourself about the blushing. And that to me has been the answer that and being around supportive people. Just you saying that you have people that you are involved with through many walks of life because you just accept people as they are. I think that that's something too that I'm like, I am in groups of people now that first of all, I'm vocal about it, so they know about it. And
Mhm.
second of all, they're good people that don't say anything. They don't say anything. They don't point it out. They just continue the conversation with me, even though I may be having an internal dialogue that is like hyperfixated, going back into that like cycle. Through your work as a therapist, I heard you mention like even with CBT, and you're like, I don't know, I didn't think about or the what was it, the
Nervous
nervous
system.
system regulation.
Mhm.
So, what is it through even through your training that you've been able to implement into into your own journey that's been helpful for you, along with the nervous system regulation? Do you mind talking about that a little bit and how that was helpful?
Well, I think just like in order to be a therapist, at least the program that I did, like you kind of have to unpack some of your own stuff. Like they make you be in counseling and practice counseling on one another. And so there's just a lot of like self-exploration, which was very helpful. Because obviously I can't be a good therapist unless I know myself well. Otherwise, I'll project the things that I have onto other people. And so I really had to just kind of delve into all of that stuff. And then once I was connected with my therapist, then eventually we moved into doing some EMDR because I have a lot of childhood trauma that I needed to process. And that was really helpful. And then once I was actually in the field, I am now trained in EMDR and I have found it so helpful for a lot of the folks that I work with, not necessarily for blushing, but just in general for processing trauma. The other piece is a lot of when we hear nervous system regulation, we think like it's this huge thing. And like for me, it's just taking care of myself and focusing on being at ease. I go on walks pretty much every day, make sure to view sunlight in the morning. I eat pretty well for the most part. Just pretty much, which is interesting because I think we talked about our religious backgrounds and how we're neither of us are religious anymore, but really viewing my body as a temple, like
Mm.
really taking care of myself in a different way, right? For me, like sometimes things that I hear from the Bible are a little triggering, but there's some good in some of that. And so I really focus on taking care of myself as much as I can, which is not always easy because I'm a mom. I have my own business, just have a lot of moving pieces. But when I can remember to take that time for myself, it makes a world of a difference, like night and day in how I react to situations, in how regulated I am overall.
I love that. And I think that that was something for me that I that you could probably relate to because I think you and I really connected during our call is that I was brought up in a way that caring for myself was verbally called selfish.
Hmm.
anytime I wanted to do something a certain way or I don't want to do that thing, it kind of got put in me at an early age that that is selfish and you need to serve others. And then I went through a long season of people pleasing and codependency and really connecting myself to the joy of others and wanting to serve others, going through religion where it was like, now I really have to give of myself to everybody so that I can prove this worthiness. Even though it's like you're taught that that's not how you get there, but then everybody around you in the group is that's how you get there. So it's just a lot of deconstruction for me. And I realized that even when it came to flushing in particular, some of the things that I learned, since mine was mostly chest and neck, which is right in where the throat chakra is that
Hmm.
I had hidden my voice for so long. And through taking care of my own body, knowing what I need, I'm really sensitive, whether that's from trauma of knowing how to read a room, read faces, read body language to stay safe. It gets correlated into I'm very empathic, which I think that it might also be empathic and trauma that are combined together as a survival trait. But even yesterday, I went to, I think I might have mentioned this to you in our call. I had my surprise baby, had postpartum depression, didn't know I had postpartum depression, suffered for like a really like good period of time, thinking that you'll just like you're willpowering through it. Then had some not necessarily complications, but just like kind of some female issues. And last November, I talked to a doctor, multiple doctors about it, about is it my IUD? Is it this? Is it that? They couldn't quite figure out where I was getting these UTIs from, bacterial vaginosis. And then some tests were showing up positive, some tests were showing up negative. Anyway, yesterday I went to a different OBGYN and Alondra, oh my gosh, just like being there. First of all, my blood pressure is always high. It's always high when I get there. I just have the white coat syndrome. So as soon as they tell me that my blood pressure is high, normally that would make me panic more. It just triggers more of a panic in me. So I coach them and tell them it's going to go up now. Like you probably either want to test me later or let me test myself at home and send you the results. So they didn't freak out. They were super chill about it. It was like a all women practice. And
Hmm.
when the nurse practitioner came in, it was the way that I shared my symptoms with her, shared what was happening with everything. She just lit up and she's like, I have some thoughts. And she left out of the room and she comes back with this packet about perimenopause and how that can create some of these issues. And it was just like this moment of like her saying, this is your appointment, this is your time. So, all of that to say, I walked before I even met her, when I walked into the office, I just felt really safe there. So even though my blood pressure still went up because I always feel like they're going to tell me something like I'm dying,
Hmm.
I felt very safe there. And then the whole appointment was so informative. We had lots of open conversation about my body, what I want to do, what my treatments could look like. And it was just a totally different thing. And I feel like I've come from a world in my body where I lived in like whatever you want to do, whatever you think. Let me not be overly opinionated on this thing because then that could cause some sort of like abandonment or whatever the case may be. So all of this long rant to say, like even when we were getting ready to do like the pap smear portion, I've never had an OBGYN say this to me. She's like, scoot down, you know, the paper's all crumply, scoot down. And she says, this is your appointment. Remember, anything you don't like, anything that's uncomfortable, just voice that to me. And it was just like a beautiful thing because I think for many people, especially women who I've met that blush or flush, there is a bit of some locking in their throat chakra. And then when I'm very much into the chakras and stuff of that nature. So even with like the stuff in the face and the head, the third eye and the crown, has that been any of your experience with using your voice, or have you always been vocal, or what has that been like for you that you feel might have been like a trigger point for you?
I was definitely not a vocal kid. I was kind of like, um, so my mom immigrated to the US when she was 15 with her family and then would go back and forth to Mexico. She had both my sister and I here, but we spent the first few years of our lives there. And so being the child of an immigrant, a single mom, like she didn't really have time for any bad behavior. So I kind of just knew that I was the oldest and I kind of just did as I was told and tried to um, really not make any fuss. Like I was always praised for being very well behaved and this and that by all sorts of people. People were constantly telling my mom, like, you have the best kids and whatnot. And it was really mostly just like out of fear for me. Not that my mom was gonna do anything by any means, just that like mom doesn't have time for me to act up. So I didn't really always allow myself to be a child. I did late in some situations because I'm a very playful and fun and energetic person, but I always felt like there was a cap to it. Um, and it was kind of like whatever my mom said, I just did because again, she didn't really have time for my rebuttal. As I got older, obviously I pushed back a little more, but even then I just knew I kind of just had to do what my mom said. And that manifested into when I was in school. I kind of just did what they said. I was always the good kid that got good grades. No one had to worry about me. But I think that was just like on the outside. I think on the inside, I didn't feel like I knew who I was or that I could use my voice or that I could say no or have a different opinion than other people. And so it wasn't until I got older and even I don't know. I think in college there was some exploration, but honestly, I would say I didn't really know myself until I was like 29. I'm 31 now. And I'm still learning things about myself every day. It's just a journey of self-exploration, but I think more recently in the last couple of years, I'm starting to really know who I am and it feels really good. And there's still some sadness, like I wish I would have known this sooner, you
Yeah,
know?
it's almost like even hearing you talk about your mom, there are a lot of things like with my mom that as especially as a mom where I have so much grace for my parents and like when I didn't when I was younger. I'm
Yeah.
like they should have known
Right.
better. But then
Yeah.
once I learned more about their stories and more about um like how hard it is to be a parent when you're like I don't know how to do this. Shoot, I'm still parenting myself here.
Yeah.
Um is that it's almost like this it's almost like this whether it's intentional or it's not intentional we wind up taking on this way of living like I was thinking about my son it was the I'm trying to think if it was my baby I think it was the baby so we were at a doctor's appointment the other day they were doing some checkup stuff on him no it was my middle kid so he just turned 11 and I just even hearing the doctor say great job oh good everything sounds good okay sit like this for me good job like it's like well
Mhm.
what else would they say but when I was a kid I internalized that good job be still do this don't do that I was a really good student similar to what you were saying I was a good kid. I tried to be a really good kid, even though I'm a middle kid, so I'm a little more disruptive. But 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 also when I was younger, I remember getting to a stage where my older brother, he's the oldest one, I remember him calling me an idiot because I would mouth back and I would
Mm.
get like a pop in the mouth or get in
Yeah.
trouble. And I remember him trying to give me advice one time and saying to me, you're such an idiot. Like, go to your room, shut the door, shove your face in a pillow, and cuss her out. Don't do it right there, like in her like arm's reach. But I just couldn't. I was like, what do you mean? This is what is coming out. So as I explored my childhood and things that happened in childhood, of course, there are things that are embedded, but it really came more in the institutionalized things such as school,
Yep.
church, corporate America, those types of places where I went in early at like 18, skipped college, went into well, quit college, went into work, and then just immediately started figuring out the system and how to ride within the system till eventually, like you said, around 29, I think I was 26-ish, 27 when I started having really bad anxiety and depression. And it was coming from similar to what you were saying about heading into grad school, where like your life is changing. You're not really a kid anymore. You don't quite feel like a grown up all the way, and everything's changing. And then you get into this place of like, well, who am I? Who am I now? And I find that with a lot of people who have erythrophobia and are trying to overcome blushing is that they really are questioning who they are, but
Mhm.
they look at this symptom of blushing and they're like, if I could just get rid of this blushing. And I'm like, okay, if it wasn't the blushing, what else would it be? Because we all know people who don't blush and they have their hangups. So we get so hyper fixated on this is how I think about and feel about the blushing and then projecting that into everybody else. I like what you said about um, they probably are thinking it's kind of weird, but nobody is really going into you're less of a person because of this thing that's happening. It's our self dialogue. Do you still find yourself in that sometimes and having to like catch yourself in that loop and pull yourself back out? Or like what does that process look like for you now when you get there, if you get there?
It hasn't happened in a bit. I'm trying to think. The last time it happened was actually really funny. I went out to lunch with by myself, and on my way out, I saw someone I used to work with, and I said hi to her, but I don't think she recognized me. And so like just like that, like I don't know, just that weird interaction. I usually blush, and so I was probably very red as I was leaving the restaurant, and then somebody told me to have a good day, and I responded, and I was like, oh my gosh, they probably thought something bad happened, that I whatever, I didn't enjoy my food, or maybe the server was rude, whatever it was, and I got in my car and I was sensing just going into like lots of shame. And I was able to really get myself out. I was like, wait a minute, hold on. You have no idea if that's what happened. And maybe, and even that person that didn't recognize you, but then probably did, maybe they just needed some time to process. Because I am the same way. I also have really bad vision that I can't really tell sometimes when I see people I know. Like I'd have to stare for a while because I have astigmatism. And so I try not to do that. Um, but anyways, so I was really able to like get that, bring that self-compassion in and be like, what is happening here? This is not what we do anymore. We don't feel negative about ourselves. And if we do, we need to challenge that because we are only human. So it really that self-compassion has done so much for me in getting myself out of it because back in the day, I would sit in it for quite a long time.
Me too. It would dip for a minute and then I would just be there. And then I get tired of being there. So I'm like, let's come back out of here. One thing that I've noticed actually just a few weeks ago when I was having a lot of flushing and I just was feeling really insecure in my being. I just not really a reason why, just that's just how I was feeling. And especially as women, I think you and I talked about this on our call. Different parts of our menstrual cycle. We can feel different ways. Hormonally, things are changing and things are happening in our body. I actually have been tracking when I'm having these like life crisis in my like
Hmm.
this was a huge moment and I looked back at a calendar and it was May 8th. I was having my last like midlife crisis or whatever, and I'm like, okay, that was like a month ago and then I was fine. And now I'm
Yeah.
like in this part of like the month again where I'm like, what is life? And I'm like, okay, this is fine. This is just you. This is who you are. Um, and learning myself too and knowing that I'm also a creative. And if I'm not having a creative outlet, then that actually weighs heavily on me. And that's why even for Blushing Phoenix, I started tailoring the message of Blushing Phoenix around passionate, ambitious, and creative people because I feel like that's who I could relate to and people who are a little more open spiritually to using your voice or I talked to you about personality testing and some other things. But I noticed that the last time I was going through that, I was sitting with myself in those feelings of it's a shame feeling. And it's like this low vibration that I was sitting with. And I thought, even though I feel this so heavily, it's not the truth. And I think that some people have a hard time with the feeling of it and how they feel to kind of like in a higher consciousness, like override that, even though that feeling may not go away, but even just changing the conversation. And I love that from your background as a therapist, there's so many like skills and tips and things that you know in regards to catching yourself. What advice or just feedback would you share with someone if the feelings feel so heavy and that's what's driving the thought process and the inner dialogue, how to get a hold of that and start
Yeah.
moving it the other direction?
I think there's a lot to be said in journaling, and you can do that in whatever way because I have people that are like, I don't like to write. And I'm like, all right, do a voice memo because that's what I do sometimes when I don't want to write. Do a voice memo, listen to it later, never listen to it again. It doesn't matter as long as you're getting some of that out there. But it's a really great way to really understand ourselves. And if you don't want to do journaling, take 15 minutes of your day to reflect on yourself because so often we're so focused on our relationship with other people, our work, all of that, that we forget to have a relationship with ourselves. And so when it's not until we build that relationship with ourselves that we truly start to understand ourselves and start to know how we can help ourselves and what we need. Because I think there isn't just a one size fits all. We're all unique people, and we need to know ourselves in order to know what's best going to help us. And if that doesn't work, then yeah, reach out for help, use your support system, get some feedback from other people too.
I love that. I think journaling, and I love that you mentioned even like voice memo, because we're getting to a place now where people don't even want to write anything down anymore. And it is sometimes it becomes so cluttery in the mind and it can feel so big. And then when you just get it out, I love that you said too, you can listen to it later or never listen to it again. It's the way it actually impacts you by getting it out of here
Yeah.
and being able to move into the next thing. So, what
Mhm.
is your perspective now versus when you first started your journey of like, I'm showing up anyway?
I guess there's not as much of fear. Like there's not as much of like the erythrophobia. It's still there, don't get me wrong, but it's just different now. It's kind of like I don't care. Um, and if people care, then they're not the people I want in my life. And in reality, there's never been like anybody that's like, oh, you blush, that's weird. I don't want to be your friend. Like that has never happened in my life. I've definitely been made fun of for blushing. But no one has ever chosen not to talk to me because of it. Um, and so really challenging those thoughts and asking myself, like, what evidence do I have that the internal dialogue in my head is even true? Most of the time we don't have any evidence. It's just something that we've created. And so I think I understand myself, my brain, how our brains work in general. We are set up to think in a negative way, just to protect ourselves. And so when you can really get a hold of that and retrain that, that's where the magic really happens. And so I know, like, I think I come off as a lot more confident. I think I've always come off a little bit confident. But I feel the most confident that I've ever really been. I'm kind of like, if I blush, okay. Um, I don't want to, but if I do, it's going to be okay. It's just really that mindset shift that nothing bad is going to happen to me because this happens to my body.
That truly is the life beyond the blush. And I think that it's when I've heard multiple people say that have overcome erythrophobia that may still have a blushing episode, but they say it's when I got my focus off myself and I really started to serve the community around me, or I was working on a project with a bunch of other people and I just kind of lost myself in the project and I realized I wasn't blushing. One thing I've noticed in my practice, because it's been 5 years for me of like actively practicing loving myself in a way of, I think you and I might have talked about this. Self-worth didn't feel like an issue to me. Confidence didn't feel like an issue to me. So when I heard self-worth, it's a self-worth issue, I would immediately dismiss it because I'm like, I take care of myself. I have learned over the years to go against the idea that that's selfish, that I'm being selfish, like that I have worked through a lot of that stuff. So last year when this whole self-worth topic hit me, it kind of pierced beneath the surface and really took me to like a 8-year-old version of me that is still looking to the outside world to tell me that I'm okay. And I think that, and I still have moments of that where I need validation. I just feel like I need validation from the outside world. I've been doing, I don't know if you've ever looked into the human design. Have you ever looked into that? It's kind of complicated.
Okay.
Somebody introduced me to it in January. I did like, you can like download an app. It's not necessarily a personality test. It's more of an aura system.
Sure.
And I remember somebody introduced me to it in January. I pulled it up. It was a lot of numbers and a lot of like gateways and chambers. And it's kind of like astrology on steroids, but it's like, it's really interesting. And I'm not huge on just like labeling, but I think these are good guides. That's why I talked to you about the personality testing, because I think they could be validating sometimes to like, oh, okay, there's other people out there that are like this. But recently it's been coming up a lot. And so I was like, let me look back into this human design thing because I didn't quite understand it and grasp it. And I have just been like deep diving into it. And I feel so seen and so like validated in the sense of there's like these four different aura types. It's like projectors and generators and manifesting generators and reflectors. And I'm a projector. And so the more I was like looking into what that means and how we work and how we show up and where our gifts are, it just gave me this sense of belonging. And I was telling my husband about this. I go back and forth between feeling like I belong here and then feeling like I'm from another world.
Mhm.
And especially with like highly sensitive people and people who have that strong, I think you and I talked about like being connected to play and the trees and the grass and like these things that you don't have normally in your day-to-day conversations of people talking about, yeah, I went and grounded myself today.
Right.
They're like, what? But I noticed from a nervous system regulation experience that the more I'm in nature, the more I'm playing, the more I'm writing, the more I'm not restricted by rigid schedules, I don't flush as much. So I started to realize that a lot of that too, whether that be, not using my voice, not living in my truth, like I think that the body is starting to speak more and more and more, and more people are coming to this like blushing space where they're like, what's wrong with me? I'm blushing.
Yeah.
But that internal sense of self-worth and perfectionism that I didn't even realize it was so deeply beneath the surface that when even you and I talked about perfectionism, where we're like, that's good enough. We'll
Yeah.
figure it out. No big deal. But then you and I both have had people tell us
Mhm.
perfectionism may be an issue. Do you agree with the perfectionism portion of that? Because I think we talked about that in regards to you didn't necessarily think you're a perfectionist, but others have told you that you are.
Yeah, yes, my therapist called me out. It was nice of her. Um, yeah, I don't really view myself as a perfectionist because I'm like, I don't really feel like I need to have things to be perfect. That was my definition of it, right? Um, but then I started thinking about it more and definitely like I care about what I put out.
Mhm.
And so I had to make some adjustments in that. Um, and I don't know, I think I'm a little bit more relaxed now overall, just in life that I'm still obviously growing and evolving. I have a really hard one big thing that I'm coming to realize lately is I sometimes need to do better at saying no to things because for me, what's important right now is to spend time with my daughter. She's about to be 4, and I really my parents growing up worked swing shift, and I say my parents because my mom eventually remarried and I had my stepdad. They worked swing shifts. The other day, my sister texted us because she was setting up summer care for her child, and she's like, "Hey, what did we do in the summer? Like, where were our parents? What did we do?" And all four of us were like, "I don't even remember our parents being there." Yeah, they were just working and we were just kind of doing our own thing. I mean, I learned how to cook when I was really young, to take care of my siblings and all of that. And so for me, it's a big value of mine is to have that quality time with my child as much as possible. And I find it really hard because I also love to work. I'm passionate about what I'm doing and I really want to make some big systemic changes. And so trying to find the balance in all of that can be really hard. There's always self-compassion that comes into it because I'm still learning and I'm like, go easy on yourself. It's okay that you said yes to too many things. Let's just not do it again. So just navigating a lot of things. I think I went off of what you were saying.
No,
But
this
I
is
also,
beautiful. I always go off of what have I been asking. So sometimes when I ask the question, I'm like, how the hell did I get there from what I was talking about the human design? But it just happens. No,
yes,
that's perfect. I mean, I
yes.
think that even in like being a mom, having the joy, but the pressures of how you want to show up and who you want to be. And I think that's something too that in this day and time, we have more say so. We have more perspective in regards to what you just said about your parents during the summer. I actually I work from home, so I'm thinking of like what can I do with my kids because this is really valuable time that I don't
Mhm.
have to just work all the time. In regards to conditioning that I've had before, is just like stay seated, stay working. Like I get up and I move. I take my kids places, and that's really important. And I think even that plays into being true to what your soul wants and what makes you feel fulfilled at the end of the day. Have you found that when you're in, as I'm asking that question, it made me think about something. Have you found that when you are in situations that feel like you're going against your truth or your values if you've been in that type of situation. Do you feel that you're more susceptible to blush then, or has yours just been more kind of caught off guard? Oh, yeah.
Both. It's both for sure. And so, I mean, it's my way of my body kind of talking to me like this doesn't feel right. And I've gotten a little better about listening to my body, listening to my gut, and I think that that also just comes with feeling more regulated so that
Mhm.
you can hear those signals. The other piece that I was going to mention, and I forgot, because you were talking about going to see a new OBGYN and all that stuff in our cycles. And with me having PMDD, after a conversation, I had told you how I feel like during luteal, I feel like I blush more. And I was more mindful of it this last time when I went through my luteal phase, and I definitely blushed so much more. Like it was just happening a lot. It's also hot, like it's very hot here. Not today, but it's been so humid that when it's hot, I also blush more. I feel like my body doesn't regulate temperature the best since having a child, and so it just happens a lot. And so I am working through that. The negative thinking is a lot harder to control when I'm in luteal phase because I'm just overall a lot more negative. There's um just difficulties managing relationships, difficulties with um how I look, which I don't really have. Can't say that I ever had too much self-image stuff. Maybe when I was younger, but as an adult, I didn't really. And then all of a sudden, I had my child, and PMDD was just like wild. And now when I'm in luteal, I notice that I just nothing fits right. I don't really talk bad about my body, but I just feel like I don't feel the best about myself.
Yeah, I think that's so relatable too, because there are things that I'm learning now that I'm discovering the whole perimenopause phase is stuff about my cycle, stuff about my body, stuff about my hormones I have never known before. Never been taught. Nobody talked about it. I'm pretty sure the women in my family just white knuckled through everything. Nobody talked about anything. But even just hearing about PMDD, the practitioner yesterday was sharing with me about PMDD, postpartum depression, perimenopause, like all these things, especially for me having a child a little later, like how all these things can kind of spiral into each other and how it impacts your hormones, and even learning about the different phases of cycle. When I first started Blushing Phoenix, it was actually called Lean In Warrior, and I got off my birth control,
Mhm.
contraceptive, oral contraceptive, hence the surprise baby. But because I thought maybe it had something to do with my medication that I was on. And then as I got off and my body did regulate in some ways that I could feel a total difference in, like, okay, that definitely had been impacting me, the oral contraceptive. But then it still didn't go away. So then it got worse in certain times, or it looked different, and which then kind of defeated me in the sense of like, well, what is it? But something I've noticed, I downloaded this app, I've been tracking some stuff with my cycle, and I'm not really familiar yet with like the follicular and the luteal and all of those, but there is a time each month, which I'm pretty sure if I go back and look, it's this probably the luteal phase, where I feel the same way. I look in the mirror and I'm like, ugh, like
Mhm.
what is happening? Like,
Yeah.
why do I look like this? And then also I don't feel my best, and I almost have to just go to bed early. I
Mhm.
just have to go to bed early. I'm like, I feel like everything feels like I'm moving through quicksand, and
Mhm.
my thoughts are loud. And so is that typical during the luteal phase?
Yeah. Yes, I think it's typical even when you don't have PMDD, but it's even way more exacerbated when you have PMDD. You're also more tired during luteal phase. You need more calories during luteal phase, so you might find that you eat more or crave more sugary stuff, whatever. For me, it's salty. Um, and so even just knowing that and having the education around or information about it has made me not feel so bad about myself.
Because you can
Because I
kind of
think,
correlate to like, okay,
yeah.
this is what's happening. Just we need to
Oh
wait
yeah.
it out. Yeah.
Yep.
We need to wait it
Exactly. And
out.
I think sometimes we as humans have this idea that we're the only ones that struggle with something. And so it feels very isolating. And which is another part of self-compassion is understanding that we are all interconnected. We all suffer and struggle. And that's just kind of what being a human is. There's good things and there's bad things, and but there's always suffering regardless. Um, And so keeping that in mind that I'm not the only one that goes through this. We all have bad days. It's okay. It really makes me feel a lot less isolated.
I love that you just spoke to all of that because one of the things that I've seen a theme with Blushing Phoenix, whether that be through the YouTube channel, social media, or through coaching, one one of the common threads that I hear constantly is just, I'm just happy to know I'm not alone. I'm just happy to know I'm not alone and that people are out there living their life. And sometimes, like even when we look at nutrition and how to get a like I need a meal plan or I'm trying to do some body recomposition. We start like watching and listening to other people to see like, well, what are other people doing so that we can try to mimic that or feel like we're hanging with people who are doing the same thing. And I've seen through Blushing Phoenix that so many people realize like a new way that, oh, I can think differently, even if I feel bad in the moment, or I can just go to bed early that night, or I can go ahead and have those extra calories to nourish myself and make sure that I'm in a good place. And just hearing people like yourself who are career women, moms, you're showing up in your gifts as well. Those invitations are coming to you and you're accepting those invitations. So for you, if you had somebody on the other side who was leaning on you in regards to their struggle with blushing, what is some encouragement or what would you want to say to them?
I would really focus on the idea that they're not alone. They're not the only ones that struggle with it, even though if it feels like that. And to really lean into their support system because oftentimes, because we feel like we're the only ones that go through it, we do really isolate ourselves or don't want to talk to other people because we feel like they might not understand. And they might not. And so then you need to find people that do understand. Just kind of build your community, whether that's in person or on the internet. There's so much power in the internet. I know that there can be some negative things to social media and all of that, but there's also some really beautiful and wonderful things in terms of connecting with other people. Um, and then just to like really go on this journey of self-exploration, like who they are, who they want to be, and start working on that. Oftentimes we talk about wanting to change and be different, but we don't spend any time doing it. And so if you're not going to do anything differently, nothing differently is going to happen. So until you take action, then nothing's really going to change.
Since you are a therapist, I know you have a specialty, but since you are a therapist and are trained as a therapist, what would you say to people who, because I've heard this quite often, that they talk to their therapist about blushing and the therapist kind of moves past the blushing and wants to go down into like other things from childhood. And it has been shared with me multiple times that people are like, it just made me feel like they're not listening, or they'll wind up coming to me through coaching. And I'm like, so what was it different about coaching versus your therapist? People who are investing their time into working with a therapist who they trust, are there any recommendations or suggestions you would make to them for being able to have that conversation at the level that they want to have the conversation? Even though I know from a therapist perspective, they know it's a symptom. So they're trying to go under that, which is what I talk to people about also. So I don't know really, I don't know if it's because that's the specialty I talk about, but any suggestions, recommendations that you have for people who are trying to discuss this with their therapist or the people who haven't even talked to their therapist about it because it's that deeply painful for them.
I think, well, I'll start with the ones that haven't. I think that there's so much power in that vulnerability and just having that conversation and bringing light to the things that happen to you. Honestly, I think that's where most of the shift has happened for me. I told you how I do Toastmasters for like exposure work, right? And the first speech I wrote, you do an icebreaker speech, and I decided to do it on erythrophobia. And so I really just brought attention to the thing that was going to happen to me anyways, because it made me feel like I was a little bit more in control of the situation. So that helped me just kind of put it out there like, hey, this is me and this is a part of me, and you're going to see it happen, just so you know. So that way people aren't as like surprised, because I think that's where it bothers me when people are like shocked when I'm blushing. Um, and so just having that vulnerability and understanding that there's power in that vulnerability. The second piece is to really be upfront with your therapist. If you feel like they're not spending as much time on what you want to focus on, to remind them, hey, this is my session and this is a really important area for me to get figured out. Can we focus on this a little bit more? And if it's they're not receptive, then maybe you want to look for somebody else. There's a lot of therapists out there. We're not going to be the best fit for everyone.
I think that that's empowering in and of itself is that people get in these sessions and they immediately hand their power over to the therapist to fix me instead
Right.
of understanding that that's a partnership.
Yes.
It's a partnership in your well-being. Well, Alondra, talk to us a little bit as we're closing out here, just a little bit about you are a therapist, you have a specialty area of focus. Talk a little bit about like just in your work, what you do, how you support people. If anybody's listening here who could also possibly be in your area, or do you, and I don't know if you do online therapy
Mhm.
as well, and talk a little bit about that, and just kind of some of the stuff where you give back to your community and anything else that you'd like to share.
So my practice name is called Cultura Counseling, which is culture in Spanish. That's primarily what I focus on helping people of color in therapy because I live in a area where most therapists are predominantly white, which is understandable. It's just Wisconsin. There is some diversity, it's growing, but not in the area that I like. In the area I live in, it's growing. If you go to like Milwaukee, Madison, there's a lot of diversity. Um, and so that's my area of focus. I also have a specialty in perinatal mental health. I don't have the letters behind my name yet because I haven't taken my exam, but that will be there. I really enjoy working with parents, helping them navigate the changes that happen once you become a parent. And not just changes personally, but also in your relationship and how to navigate those things. I struggled with postpartum depression. My PMDD was just like exploded after having a child, and it was really hard for me to navigate. And so I want to be that helping person for others that are struggling. And then the other big piece of my practice is that I am very focused. So I co-own the practice with my sister. She does operations and billing, and I do therapy. Is that we're very, very focused on some systemic change with the pay that therapists get. Therapists don't get paid very well, and it requires a lot of schooling to be a therapist, and reimbursements rates from insurances are pretty low. And so we're really focused on trying to change that. We are working on figuring out ways to do that, but within our company, the people we hire get paid a very um, living wage, like more than just paycheck to paycheck, because that
Mhm.
is ridiculous. Um, and they also work less because therapists are very overworked. At the last place I worked at, I was supposed to see 30 clients a week, which is really ridiculous. To just keep doing back-to-back sessions, I really didn't have any time to even prepare. So I always felt like I was unprepared. Lots of blushing happened for that. It's just not aligning with who I am as a person. Um, and so we're trying to change that, give people better work-life balance so that they themselves are better therapists, have better home lives, can spend more time with their children or partners or whoever is important to them, but just be able to better take care of themselves. Um, I'm located in Wisconsin, only licensed in Wisconsin, so I can only see people here. But I do virtual and in person.
And if anybody in that area is looking for a therapist in any of those specialties and who understands erythrophobia,
Yes. Yes.
Alondra is your woman. Um,
Exactly.
that is so awesome. Alondra, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for just sharing your words of wisdom and your experience with people. I think that our stories really help to build up and support others. And like you said, I think that thread of suffering, but also knowing that you're not alone in it, that other people ebb and flow. That's just part of us being human. That's been a big realization for me also is like, I think I'm just being a human. I think I'm just being a human. And I think that's where the whole perfectionism tie kind of fizzled for me was it's how I show up in the world and what I put into the world as perfection, not so much how I view perfectionist. And it's like, I think that's just called being a human. It's like messy. It's really raw, but then sometimes it's really polished and then sometimes it's messy again. Like that's just part of life and being in life. So
Exactly.
thank you for showing that here and also validating that for those who are struggling to understand that we ebb and flow.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the two times that we've been on calls. I don't think I've really blushed, but I promise I do blush.
Well, and I told you on our call, I was like, you're brown skin. Like I was like, I'm so not used to talking to people with
Yeah.
this beautiful brown skin that blush. And so I think even for people who do reach out to me or maybe don't, they're like, well, clearly this doesn't happen to people with more of the brown skin. It's like it does. When as soon as I saw you, I was like, oh my gosh, look at you. You're beautiful and you're brown skin.
Yep, yep, yeah, I know, which we talked about added another layer to me because I was like, oh my gosh, I do have more brown skin and I feel like I shouldn't blush.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, that's something we don't hear about often because with the more fair skinned people, it is like so in your face. And even for me in the past, I don't do it anymore, but I used to like self tan because I felt like it made it look better. And you're like the color that I would want to be to make it not look as bad.
it's still very noticeable, very, very noticeable, I promise.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. It's been great to talk with you, and I hope we stay connected.
Of course.